Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is the eighth event in our public lecture series on the Wisconsin idea, past and present. You guys have, most of you have heard this spiel before, but I say it because each one is recorded. This lecture series is part of a new course that is being taught for the first time this fall under the auspices of the Department of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name is Chad Allen Goldberg. I'm a faculty member in the sociology department, and I have the honor to serve as the instructor for the course this semester. The Wisconsin idea has always been about more than training students for the workforce. It meant, as Adlai Stevenson once put it, a faith in the application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society, the aspiration to light the way of Wisconsin citizens and government with the best torches of knowledge and understanding that their university can provide. Accordingly, this lecture series and the course with which it is associated aim to bring students, staff, and faculty and the UW system into a broad conversation with the citizens of the state about how the knowledge produced at the University of Wisconsin has benefited the public in the past and continues to do so today. I encourage you to participate actively through our course website, www.wiskidea.com, and our Facebook page. If you are live tweeting this or subsequent lectures, please use the hashtag WiskIdea. The sociology department is offering this course with limited resources from our academic and supplies and expenses budget. If you would like to contribute to this project to allow us to offer real-time broadcasts or otherwise improve our offerings this semester or in the future, please consider making a contribution to the Department of Sociology Annual Fund. You can do that through the course website. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to remind you that the November 1st lecture next week by sociologist Matthew Desmond will be held at a special time and location, 7 o'clock p.m. at the Memorial Union, just down the street, 800 Langdon Street. Special time and location because, of course, that is the university's 2016 Go Big Read event. Tickets are required to attend Professor Desmond's lecture next Tuesday. I understand that all the tickets are gone, so if you don't have a ticket at this point, unfortunately, you will not be able to get one from the Memorial Union ticket office. However, there will be an overflow room at the Memorial Union where people can watch a live video stream of the lecture.
I know about the one in Union South.
Oh, and
There is one in Union South.
there is one in Union South as well. So, okay. So for details about this, you should go to the Go Big Read website. And Patrick is reminding me, I do want to ask, we talked about this a little bit earlier, if folks here would like an additional overflow room with live video streaming of Matt Desmond's lecture next Tuesday, we could arrange that so that you could come here to the Pyle Center and watch, in addition to the overflow rooms that are being set up elsewhere. If you think you would be interested in doing that, coming here to the Pyle Center, to an overflow room that's specifically set up for our Wisconsin Idea lecture series, please raise your hand. I just want to get a sense of how many people in the room might want to do this. Okay. Okay, so it looks like more people than responded last week, so I think Patrick is giving me the thumbs up that we will set this up and arrange this. So I think we can put information about this on the website, but know that there will be an overflow room set up here at the Pyle Center next week. Okay, let me get to tonight's business. We are fortunate to continue our lecture series tonight with a lecture by Dr. Catherine J. Cramer on the politics of resentment. Like all of our speakers, she is graciously donating her time and expertise free of charge out of a commitment to public service. Dr. Cramer is director of the Morgridge Center for Public Service and a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she teaches courses on citizenship, democracy and difference, public opinion, political communication, political participation, and political psychology. She is also an affiliate faculty member in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, the La Follette School of Public Affairs, the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, the Wisconsin Center for the Advancement of Post-Secondary Education, the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies, and the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems. She is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including a 2006 UW-Madison Chancellor's Distinguished Teaching Award, a Baldwin, Wisconsin IDEA Endowment Grant in 2007 to 2008, the American Political Science Association's 2012 Qualitative and Multi-Method Research Section Award, a UW-Madison Vilas Associate Award from 2012 to 2014, and a 2015 to 2018 Leon Epstein Faculty Fellowship Award. Dr. Cramer's work focuses on the way people in the United States make sense of politics and their place in it. She is known for her innovative approach to the study of public opinion, in which she invites herself into the conversations of groups of people to listen to the way that they understand public affairs. She has also published as Catherine Cramer Walsh and is the author of Talking About Politics, Informal Groups and Social Identity in American Life, published in 2004, and chosen that same year for the UW-Madison Letters and Science Honors Degree Common Book Program. A co-author with other members of the American Political Science Association's Task Force on Civic Engagement and Civic Education of Democracy at Risk, How Political Choices Have Undermined Citizenship and What We Can Do About It, published in 2005. And she is the author of Talking About Race, Community Dialogues and the Politics of Difference, published in 2007. Her most recent book, The Politics of Resentment, Rural Consciousness in Wisconsin and the Rise of Scott Walker, was published this year by the University of Chicago Press. If you are interested in purchasing the book, you can go to the University of Chicago Press website. It is on sale there. The book examines rural resentment towards cities and its implications for contemporary politics. Please join me in welcoming Professor Catherine J. Cramer.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Chad and to Patrick for doing this course, for inviting me to be a part of it. It's really an honor to be a part of this inaugural year, and thank you to all of you who enrolled in the course and who are here tonight. I'm going to ask a quick question about how I advance the slides. I forgot to ask you. But as Chad helps me with that, I am going to start off with a bit of autobiography. I'll show you in a moment here. I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, right here in Grafton, Wisconsin. And I start with that so that I can tell you about my initial connection with the Wisconsin idea. Growing up as a kid in Grafton, Wisconsin, I did not know the term, but I knew that the University of Wisconsin-Madison was a great university that if I worked my rear off in school and was fortunate enough, I could probably get in. And it was also a place where my family and I would come for football games. My grandparents would talk about their experience attending football games here in Madison. And it was something that I aspired to be a part of. It was also an institution that my family felt some ownership of. Even though neither of my parents attended here, and actually no one in my relation had attended school here except for my grandfather's brother, my grandmother's brother. And that is part of the Wisconsin idea, I think, this sense that many people in the state feel a deep connection to this university and this university system, even if they've never set foot here. So I was thrilled to be able to be a student here. And I did go attend college here and graduated from here. And along the way, I learned what the Wisconsin idea is. I had a grand experience here, which I can be happy to tell you more about at length. But what part of my experience here was encountering the study of public opinion, which I wasn't aware that someone could earn a living studying public opinion. But it fascinated me, and I was fortunate to have a young female professor by the name of Wendy Ron, who taught a class on public opinion that I now have the privilege to teach, sometimes in the very same lecture room. And what I learned from that class and subsequently in graduate school was that what fascinates me is the way people make sense of politics. I also learned that the best way for me to study that is to listen to people. So I used survey data, meaning mass sample scientific polling data, But I also like to sit down with people in the places that they normally spend time and listen to the way they talk. Because the question that motivates me is not necessarily why do people know so little about politics, or how can people be so stupid about politics, but instead, how are they understanding politics? How are they getting it? So when I had the great fortune of earning tenure here at this great university, I designed a study that enabled me to study the thing I love in the place that I love, meaning the state of Wisconsin. At the time, I was very interested in how our social class identities matter for the way we interpret politics. How does it matter the way we think of ourselves in terms of status among the rest of people in the population? How does that matter for the way we think about our politicians, candidates, public policies? And at the time, I was also the faculty director of the Badger Poll, which was a statewide public opinion poll that our great UW Survey Center used to conduct. And I wanted to find a way to get out into the state and ask people what they were thinking about before setting the agenda for the poll, as opposed to just talking to my friends here in Madison and making some assumptions about what the big issues are in the state. So here's what I did to do those things, to get out and around the state, to study political understanding, and to help set the agenda for the Badger Poll. I carved up the state into 8 different regions depending on political leanings, type of agriculture, population density, type of demographics, and a variety of other indicators to get basically the different regions of the state. And then within each of those regions, I sampled a small place and a big place. And sometimes the big place was obvious, not necessarily so, though. So I would sampled 16 places and then some additional places to get me a wide range of communities in the state. I wasn't aiming for a perfect cross-section of the state. Instead, what I wanted was a wide range of places. And so my interest was in social class identity at the time, and I thought, well, if I sample some lower income places, some higher income places, some urban places, some rural places, what I'm going to get is people from a wide range of walks of life, social class, socioeconomic status, however you want to describe it. And then what I wanted to do was invite myself into conversations among people in these places. So here are the 27 communities that I sampled. I ended up spending time with 39 groups in all. In May of 2007, I embarked on this grand adventure of inviting myself into conversations around the state of Wisconsin. So between May of 2007 and November of 2012, I spent time with these 39 different groups, an average of a little over 2 times a piece, but some groups as many as 5 or 6 times. And you're probably wondering towards the end of my talk, have I gone back to these groups? Yes, so I'm still spending time with these groups because politics just keeps getting more and more interesting. So before I show you some of these places and how I went about inviting myself into these conversations, I want to add one thing about why I did this research and why I was able to do this research. I applied for a Baldwin grant, as Chad mentioned briefly in introducing me. And when I applied, my first application was something about studying local level elected officials. I still think it was a pretty good idea, but between the pre-proposal stage and the final proposal stage, I had this epiphany that really what I wanted to do was spend time with ordinary Wisconsinites. And the Baldwin Committee said to me, while you're out there, will you please ask about the university? We want to know what they think about us. And I think it's important in this class on the Wisconsin idea for you all to know that much of what I'm about to describe to you, many, many, many people on this campus have been very eager to hear about. There is a deep concern on this campus about how people in the state think about this institution, what they want from it, how they want to be connected with it. And so, with all that in mind, here's what I did. I went to places like this, a diner, sometimes a gas station, sometimes a restaurant, because what I had done was to call up the UW Cooperative Extension Office in the county where one of these places fell, and I said, where in such and such Wisconsin can I go where I can just walk in and introduce myself and people will let me be a part of their conversation? And they pointed me oftentimes to gas stations early in the morning, typically, a group of people on their way to work, sometimes retirees. So it depended on the community. In a lot of our smaller communities in Wisconsin, the gas station is where people gather. But again, sometimes it was a church, sometimes it was a diner. There's, a variety of other types of places. But what I would do would be to show up, park my car, take a deep breath, walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Kathy from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Do you mind if I join you this morning?" And they would laugh, and I know you're all holding it back. They would laugh and chuckle, and they'd say, "Sure, we got nothing else to do." And then I would give them my business card, and I'd say, "I'm a public opinion scholar at the university. I'm really interested in what you all are talking about, what you think." I gave them a pad of Post-it notes or a pen or a football schedule. I said, just as a token of my appreciation. And then often people would say, "Are my taxpayer dollars paying for this?" And I'd say, no, it's donated by the Alumni Association. And then I would say, "Do you mind if I turn on my recorder?" I had a relatively big digital recorder at the time. And most of the time people said, "Not a problem." And then I would say, "Tell me, what are the big concerns in your community? What are you all talking about these days?" And then they would tell me. And as time went on, I realized that a lot of what I was hearing was a pretty deep and pervasive resentment among people in rural Wisconsin, small town Wisconsin, toward the cities. So that's what I want to describe for you tonight, and then explain how I see it having implications for our politics, and then I'm going to come back around to the Wisconsin idea. Before I say another word, though, I want you to just keep in mind that this is not a cross-section of the state of Wisconsin. What I'm giving you is the contours of these conversations that I invited myself into. I've heard similar conversations across many places in the state, which is why it led me to believe that this is a really important sentiment that we need to pay attention to. But this is not the sentiment of everyone in every rural town across Wisconsin. But it's an important strain of thought, it's an important perspective, and I will make that case by showing you how it underpins many of our politics these days. So here's what it looks like. I heard in many places this sort of mental map of Wisconsin, that there's basically Madison and Milwaukee, and then there's the rest of us. The M&Ms, sometimes people would say, and outstate Wisconsin. Those terms ruffle feathers depending on who's saying it, so I'm going to try to stick to urban and non-urban Wisconsin. But there's more to it than just this map, right? I show the map again just to remind you all that Madison and Milwaukee do take up a lot of our mental space when we think about Wisconsin, and maybe especially so when you live in Madison, right? But there's a lot of the rest of geography of the state beyond those two metro areas. So it was basically that mental map, but also this sense that Madison is sort of a power center. And so many times when people were telling me about Madison, they were talking about the state legislature and the university. And I'm surprised no one's laughing at that, because we don't necessarily think of the university and the state legislature as one piece right now, right? But for many folks, people would be talking about those people down in Madison. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. So it's partly about that. It was partly about this map of where the resources go in the state. So a common refrain was that, Madison sucks in all of our taxpayer dollars, spends them on itself or on Milwaukee, and we don't see it in return. So this sense of, an unfairness with respect to the allocation of resources. But it was also a sense of unfairness with respect to decision-making power or political power. There was a sense among many folks that, all the decisions are made in Madison and communicated out to the rest of us, that Madison's not really listening to the rest of the people in the state. So partly about, we're on the short end of the stick with respect to resources, with respect to power, and also with respect to respect. So people would tell me, city folks just don't get us. They don't understand what rural life is like and how we live and what's important to us. I'm going to pause for a moment and give you an example in their own words. So here's an example from a group of women who are meeting for breakfast in the far northwest corner of the state of Wisconsin. They meet on Tuesday mornings, I think 9:30 every week. And I'm asking them about their concerns in the state and also their perceptions of UW-Madison. And all the names I'll use as I'm quoting people are made up to protect their identity. Teresa says to me, as a former educator, I resented highly comments such as, there is no education north of Highway 8. Highway 8's a highway that runs east-west across the state in the northern tier of the state. And she said, and we send them such absolutely excellent and well-prepared students there that they, the attitude that we are the hick area of the state, it was painful. And I asked her, I said, so who did you get that from? From recruiters? And she said, well, from professors. And I said, really? When they would visit here? And she said, yeah, or publish newspaper articles or other, And that was a little distressful because I think northern Wisconsin feels a little far away from Madison anyway. And we keep waving our hands and saying, yoo-hoo, there's another half of a state up here. Up north is not Wausau. Well, many of us consider Wausau to be up north, right? I certainly did growing up. That was a lesson. Here's another group of people. This is another weekly group, and these folks are meeting in the basement of their church because the church is, there's not a gas station in this tiny little town, and the church is the meeting place. So here we have, it's men and women, some really young kids, some retirees, some farmers, some people who work in a nearby town and they drive over once a week for this little coffee clutch. It's sort of, a notable gathering in the community. And again, I'm asking them about the university, and I am saying, what do you think the University of Wisconsin-Madison does not do well? When you think about it, Martha says, well, represents our area. I'm sorry, I forgot to say this is in the northwest corner of the state as well, so quite about a 4-hour drive away from here. What do you think the University of Wisconsin-Madison does not do well? Martha says, represents our area. We're strange to Madison. They want us to do everything from Madison's laws and the way they do things, but we totally live differently than the city people live, so they need to think more rural instead of all this city area. And Donna says, we can't afford to educate our children like they can in the cities. Simple as that. We don't have the advantages. And Ethel says, all the things they do based on Madison and Milwaukee, never us. And Martha says, yeah, we don't have the advantages that they give their local people there, I think, a lot of times. And it's probably because they don't understand how rural people live and what we deal with and our problems. So this perspective I'm describing in the title of my book, I call it Rural Consciousness. There's a longer story behind why I use that term that's based in political science. But simply what this is this identity as a person from a small town in Wisconsin. I'm a person from a place like this, is sometimes the way it came across to me, combined with a perception of injustice, a sense that folks like me in a place like this are constantly on the short end of the stick. We don't get our fair share of stuff, we don't get our fair share of power, and we don't get our fair share of respect. So, how does this matter? Well, back to the Wisconsin idea for a moment. Like I said, as a kid growing up in Grafton, Wisconsin, I felt that and experienced that strong love that people have for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I certainly heard that out and around the state, where people, I can't tell you how many times I walked into a gas station or a diner and people wearing their Badger gear. They had no idea I was coming. They weren't putting it on for me. And that connection, even though for many folks, Badger sports is their connection to us, it's a deep sense that, this university belongs to the people of the state. At the same time, you can probably guess that from these comments, there's also this sense that, people in Madison are not listening to people like me. It's hard to get into that school. It costs a lot. The professors are lazy and liberal and elitist. And mind you, they're saying this directly to me, even though I've given them my business card. They know I'm a political science professor. They weren't holding back. So it was this combination of, it's a great university. We would love to have more of it. And it's so distant from us in many ways. So I'll come back to the Wisconsin idea in a moment. but I'm going to shift over to politics, just more straightforward politics for the time being. So I'm going to tell you kind of 3 storylines of how I see this perspective that I encountered playing out in politics these days. And it's basically storylines that underpin why someone viewing the world through this perspective might support a smaller government candidate. So here's what I mean. One storyline is that it's not the case that people who were exhibiting this resentment toward the city were saying, we don't want any government, like we want to roll back government till it is actually non-existent. What they were saying to me is, why would we ever agree to pay more taxes? Because that money is not going to come back and support people like me and communities like this. That often arose in conversations about education, where people would say to me, look, Kathy, I mean, obviously we care about our local schools. Our local school is everything to this community. Once they consolidate our local schools with another community, we're basically going to evaporate, because that is the heart and soul of who we are. And of course, they were telling me how much they care about good education for their kids. But what they would say is, we're not going to pay more money to improve education, because all that money is going to go to Madison and Milwaukee. So that's one storyline. Another is, even though about 10% of the population in any municipality in the state of Wisconsin is employed by a government, either local, county, or state, that there's a sense that government is basically an urban entity, that the decisions that are made that underpin the way those people do their jobs, whether we're talking about teachers or the postal workers or the county government officials, those decisions are made in cities with not enough attention or understanding of the concerns and the challenges that people in small towns face. So there again, look around at our community, Kathy. People would say to me, whatever government is doing is not benefiting people like us, so why would we want more of it? So here's the last one, and actually I should flash back to this bottom line here. You can imagine how this played out in Act 10, right? So when Act 10 was happening here, and we were wondering, who are these people supporting Act 10, right? Oftentimes these were folks who were saying, public employees seem to be having it pretty good. And let me go to my next narrative to help explain this a little bit. Sometimes people would say, look, we are working so hard in this community to make ends meet. And a lot of times the people who would be telling me that were doing some kind of manual labor, either in agriculture or logging. And they would say, we work so hard to make ends meet. And for example, we can't afford healthcare insurance. And yet we're being asked to pay taxes and increase taxes to pay for the health insurance of public employees who seem to be sitting behind desks all day and not working as hard as we do. And so in one respect, this image of government as an urban thing, this sense that the wealth is in the cities, that public employees being intertwined in that, underpinned this sense that, of course we're going to vote for someone who's going to cut back on the benefits going to public employees. Of course we're going to vote for someone who says they're going to decrease the size of government. Part of this, too, is a story about race, right? These notions of deservingness and people working hard are intertwined with our conceptions of race and intertwined with racism in the contemporary U.S. And so I know that some of you are wondering, when people are talking about those people in the cities, isn't that racism? Part of it. Part of it. But I resist mentioning that until now, so that you hear all this other stuff I'm telling you about people criticizing folks like me. I'm white, and I'm basically a wealthy urbanite, and people are expressing their resentment towards the lifestyle that I live, perhaps my values. And so race is definitely a part of the story, but I do not want you to walk away from this and say, see, those people are just racist, and have that be your explanation for why there might be resentment in outstate Wisconsin toward the cities, or why people in outstate Wisconsin might not want to support some government programs. So here we have resentment, and I'm emphasizing that term because we hear a lot about voter anger these days, which is real and pretty powerful. But I think the notion of resentment is important to keep in mind, because I heard these attitudes way back in 2007, and I'm sure they weren't new then. Resentment to me is kind of this slow boiling attitude that can be fomented into anger, which can be mobilized at the polls. And so part of the reason it's powerful is that it's this simmering thing that builds and builds and builds until someone taps into it. And it's also really complex. There's many layers to these attitudes I've just described, right? It's these attitudes toward cities and city people. It's attitudes towards public employees. It's attitudes towards people of color. And it's also this partisanship, right? I don't at all want to skim over the fact that basically across the country, as in Wisconsin, our cities lean Democratic and our outstate areas lean toward the Republican Party. All right, briefly, I know some of you are wondering, okay, but are they right? Is it the case that they're not getting their fair share? So I want to show you some statistics, just briefly. I'm going to show you a series of charts, and on these charts, there's a dot for each of the counties in Wisconsin. And what I've done here on this specific chart is to array in 2010 dollars on a per capita basis. The x-axis is each county arrayed by how rural it is, according to several different indicators. And then the y-axis is the dollars per capita going to people in that particular county. And basically what this chart is showing you is there is not much of a relationship with respect to the allocation of state taxpayer dollars in 2010. It's basically a flat line. So you might say, okay, people in rural areas are saying that they're not getting their fair share. If anything, they seem to be getting a little bit more on a per capita basis than people in urban areas. The federal aid per capita is basically the same thing. Now I'm going to show you, well, how about how much money folks pay into the collective pot? So I heard some claims about how we pay more than our fair share as compared to people in the cities. So what this chart is showing you is the dollars per capita on a county basis paid in to the state taxpayer pot. And if anything, people living in rural counties pay less than people in urban counties. The federal graph is the same. Now, finally, I'm going to show you two graphs that are basically a fair share calculation, which is taking into account both the amount of money people are paying in and what they're getting back. And again, if anything, it looks like people living in rural counties are getting back more than their fair share compared to people in urban counties, and the same with respect to federal dollars paid. Now, I could stop there, and you could walk away and say, see, they don't know what they're talking about. So I want to show you three more graphs. Because if you're a person living in a rural community, you don't know these calculations, right? But you do know that you're unemployed, or your parents are, or your neighbors are. You see the poverty in your community. And the next graphs I'm going to show you underpin why it might be the case that people in small town Wisconsin would look around and say, we are struggling here economically. So the first one is with respect to median household income. It's much lower in our rural counties than in our urban counties in the state of Wisconsin. With respect to people living below the poverty line, our poverty in our cities in Wisconsin is no joke. It's a real problem, but it's a pretty significant problem in our rural areas too. And unemployment, there you go as well. So it's a complicated story, right? And I want this to be complicated for us all, to realize that there is something, there's real empirical evidence why people would look around at their community in small town Wisconsin and say, we're struggling. All right, how does this matter for politics? Scott Walker comes onto the scene, runs for governor in 2010, right? Act 10, the protests. Wisconsin has basically been a window to these struggles going on in other states across the country. And I'll get to the presidential election in a moment. But for me, I was planning on winding up my fieldwork in 2009. But when the 2010 gubernatorial race happened, Act 10, it was clear that I had more to learn, or at least I was very curious about how the people I had met were making sense of everything going on. And what I want to share with you is not necessarily people's comments on Scott Walker, but the ways in which I think he very adeptly tapped into this sentiment that I'm describing, this rural consciousness, the resentment toward the cities. And what I'm going to do is use some remarks he made about the high-speed train line. So my question up here is, what does tapping into this sound like? My little kind of smart alecky comment here is it sounds like a train. It sounds like a high-speed train. So here is Scott Walker in the 2010 gubernatorial race in the primary in the first debate. And this, I'm going to quote him verbatim on the way he talked about this high-speed train line that, can I see a show of hand at how many of you know what I'm talking about, the high-speed train line? Okay, so he recaps a bit of it too for us as well. If you look at what Jim Doyle and Tom Barrett have put on the table in spending $810 million on a high-speed train line between Milwaukee and Madison, with no assurance that it will go to Eau Claire or La Crosse or anywhere else, it's just about those two areas, and it's about taking that money that will cost the citizens of Wisconsin up to $10 million per year, according to their numbers. I think it will actually be much more. That's $10 million that doesn't go to fix the road that goes up from West Salem through the cutout up to Black River Falls. It doesn't fix streets in La Crosse. That's money that's taken away from our local roads and our bridges and our other transportation needs today. Pretty effectively tapping into this. There's Madison and Milwaukee, and then there's the rest of us folks, right? And then using the term "our" to talk about who is he being a part of who, what's the community there, right? It's not Madison and Milwaukee, it's the rest of the state. Okay, the presidential race. I didn't expect my book to be relevant to the 2016 presidential campaign, but obviously you may be, in many ways, I've been naive throughout this whole thing. I've lived in this state my whole life. These attitudes were a big surprise to me, and I'll just admit that for the record. The presidential race, I guess I was less surprised than many, but still nevertheless surprised. But here's the way I see Donald Trump doing so well. Donald Trump is not a small government candidate, but he has been very adept at tapping into the politics of resentment, right? Because he's come along and he said, you are right. You are right. You are totally on the short end of the stick, and you should be pissed as hell about it, right? I am too. And if I get in there, I'm going to make America great again. So many of these sentiments are very nostalgic, right? People are remembering a time when their community was thriving. And where has it gone? It's gone somewhere. It's gone seemingly to the cities, right? To these undeserving folks who don't respect people like me. The rhetoric of the Trump campaign has been, pretty adept at tapping in to that sentiment. So finally, I want to return to the Wisconsin idea. Part of what I've described, in the conversations that I encountered and the way that the Trump campaign has tapped into it is resentment toward urban elites like me. This sense that city folks don't get what's going on in a lot of other parts of the country. And in general, it's this feeling of being disrespected, discounted, ignored. And basically, I think that is what is happening when people say, how can people be so stupid? So I hope when you leave here, that you leave here with the sense, when you hear that conversation of people wondering why people vote for Donald Trump, even now, after events of the last few weeks, that your response is, well, they're stupid. Because there's so much more to it. That's not accurate in my experience. There's a pretty complex sentiment underpinning the reason that many folks are voting for Donald Trump. But that, drawing your attention to this question brings me back to my experience as a kid growing up in Wisconsin, coming to this great university and having my world be very complicated for me, right? And learning about public opinion and learning about the complexity of ideas out there. There's been many reasons in the past few years for us all to consider what is the purpose of this university, what is the purpose of the Wisconsin idea. And so I want to end by sharing my reflections on that. When I think back, and I know that you have encountered this, and partly in Chad's even opening remarks reminded us of this, that when I think back to the origins of this great university, and I should say my dear friend Gwen Drury sitting in the back row here has taught me so much about this, that when the people of the state of Wisconsin formed this university, part of what they were trying to do was figure out, okay, how do we give people the skills they need to earn a livelihood? But they were also trying to figure out, how do we build buildings? How do we build roads? But also, and perhaps most importantly, they were trying to figure out, how do we do this thing called democracy? How do we do this self-governing thing? How do we form a state? How do we figure out how to make decisions that treat each other in a just and civil fashion? And so one of the purposes of a university like this is both to give individuals the skills to do that, and also to be a public institution that helps other public institutions do that work. So by that I mean, the Wisconsin idea to me is not about me standing in front of you and communicating out what I know. The Wisconsin idea to me is, how do I help people acquire the skills they're going to need to be their best civic selves? As a political science professor, how do I do my work so that when people leave this university, they don't necessarily become political scientists, but they become great contributing members of society, both in the way they earn their livelihood, but also in the way they interact with others and participate in their government. But also the Wisconsin idea to me is, how do we as a university interact with government, with other public institutions to do this thing called democracy? Because we are a think tank in many ways, but we can't do our work without actually learning from others, listening to people. So you can probably tell from the way I did this work that I value listening very, very much. I enjoy it. I had a heck of a great time doing this work, and I learned a lot from it. And I think when I look around at the state of the Wisconsin idea today, as well as the state of our democracy, I think, wow, we really need more listening. We really need to figure out how to listen to one another and not get all riled up about what we're hearing, right? And try to find some collective solutions. I'm finding it difficult, honestly, these days to do that in my classroom. I think maybe it's just me getting older, but in the 16 years that I've been teaching here, I find it harder and harder to have conversations about politics, but I don't think that's specific to my classroom. What I'm striving for as an individual political scientist these days is to create a classroom in which I am giving people the skills to listen to points of view that really rile them up. And so one thing I try to keep telling myself is that education at its best is not about me just giving people job skills, but is about all of us teaching people a willingness to listen to difference, a willingness and the skills to know how to expose themselves to different points of views and to figure out what to do about it. So this has been really an honor to be able to give you my thoughts tonight, and I'm really looking forward to your own comments and your own thoughts. And I'll just end by saying, long live the Wisconsin idea. Long live our great University of Wisconsin, and by that I mean the whole shebang, from extension to our various colleges and two-year institutions. Public radio, the system in general, is a glorious thing. And I say long live the Wisconsin idea, particularly at this moment in time, because we really need to learn how to understand one another. And I think this great public university is a fabulous source of helping us figure us all how to do that. So thank you for your attention. I'm really looking forward to your comments.